So let's talk about managing scope creep and project changes. I had another conversation on the break that we'll begin to kind of pull into and work as an example as we talk moving forward here. So let me see. Before we talk about managing change, let's talk about rework. Does anybody know what rework is? As I click the slide, to me, rework is just this unexplainable, uncompensated reality that things just happen in our business. We're in the creative business of solving technical problems. Sometimes rework is what I call self-inflicted. Hey, it's just really fun to do something, and then why not just do the same thing again tomorrow? It was so much fun yesterday, let's redesign it all over. Or you know what, it's when we've got something done that would work, but then maybe one of our reviewers or another engineer or another architect in our office goes, well, that will work perfectly, but I would have done it differently. So why don't you just go ahead and do it the way I would do it, even though what you did would work. So we could go back and spend another 2 days doing what I would have done if I would have given you input 3 days ago. But we'll just go ahead and do it my way, even though your way would totally work, but now we'll just do it all over again. I'm being a little facetious, but a little bit not there. It could be formally, like if we got to earn value analysis or something like that after we've completed some steps. So it's this in essence, going back and doing something again. One firm took a look at how bad this was, how prevalent it was over a given course of a calendar year. They looked at 28 projects. In the best of instances, they realized about 8% of the job was spent in rework, doing something again. In the worst of instances, more than 23% of the time in that job was spent in rework. We're going to talk a little bit about profitability tomorrow, but I can tell you we're not the most profitable of industries when it comes to professional services. If you're spending that much time doing the work again, all of our profit may be gone right there in that slide. So that's a big deal. Well, before I go into the slide, I want to just ask a question. We've got a polling question in there. Chelsea, I think that's in there. I don't know. Can we bring this polling question up? A major engineering firm studied scope creep, and what percent of client-driven changes did they recover? So this should hopefully not be a tough one for everybody to answer, but I want to just kind of get your take on it. Major engineering firm studied scope creep. What percentage of client-driven changes did they recover? So almost half the people have voted. The votes are flooding in right now, and you're gonna have some splaining to do when we get to these all answered. I think we're waiting for 2 more folks to vote. We give it a little bit, 1 more person to vote, and let's see, almost all the votes are in there. I'm not sure if that 1 person can vote. We'll give them another 5 seconds here. And then, I guess, go ahead, Chelsea, we can close that out and we'll, whoop, there we go. So yeah, less than a quarter of you said less than 25%. Almost half of you said 25 to 50%. Another quarter of you said 50 to 75. Okay, somebody open up the mute button, because you got to explain this to me. If this is a client-driven change, what percent should we collect?
100.
100. Okay, I'm with you on that. So, Axel, help me interpret. Stephanie, help me interpret these details.
As much as a client adds scope, they still don't want to pay for it.
Okay, so some clients don't want to pay.
In my opinion, is they have their set scope from the beginning. They expect even with T&M jobs, they're like, oh, you've gone over what was estimated. Well, I'm not going to pay you for that.
Okay, so they just want free salmon, just no matter what.
Yes, they want lots of free salmon.
Lots of free salmon. Okay, what were you going to say, Axel?
A lot of times they say, well, the reason why we have these changes is because we don't have enough money.
Right. Oh, if we had more money, we could pay for it. But since we don't have money to pay for it, why don't you just go ahead and do that for us?
Yeah.
Okay. And how about you? It looks like Eileen and
Sometimes
Liz.
it's a small change, and at the time, it might not seem like it's significant enough to go through the paperwork to do a change order or add service.
Yep.
It's just, oh, just this little thing, would you mind? And then those things start to snowball.
Mm-hmm. And don't nickel and dime me while we're at it too. I mean,
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. That's a big one in there.
Mm-hmm.
How about you, Liz?
I recently addressed a scope creep and was told that they had envisioned the scope one way all along, and that it was my interpretation that wasn't correct to begin.
I love that. If you were smart enough, you would know what I was thinking, right? I mean, there's lots of different ways they can play that. They can throw the guilt card in there. If you were smart enough, you would know what I really wanted. Or other clients played. I love this one. Have you ever played the Bring Me a Rock game? Like, I don't know what I want, but I'll tell you when I see it. So bring me a rock. And then they go, oh, no, I mean a bigger rock. And then you bring a big rock and they go, well, I meant a brown big rock, obviously that. So then you go get a brown big rock. And then, well, no, I meant a grayish brown. And then, this is the 5th time you brought that rock. And they go, well, yeah, that's what I wanted all the way along. Now that I've seen 5 of them, I can kind of have them to compare against. So all of these drivers of change are legit because they're out there, I would say. But they're frustrating. This firm found out that they were collecting about 60 cents on the dollar. So not too far off from where you were, but I would say also, woefully inadequate. So why didn't they collect it? Number one, not asking for the change. And Liz, you kind of brought it up a little bit, some of that psychological warfare that can happen is, well, I mean, you should have known what I wanted. I mean, you're the technical professional. Like, there's lots of different ways that can be articulated. But has anybody ever been to, my experience in America is you don't really do this in America, but I love going to markets or bazaars and things like that as I've traveled the world. Whenever you ask somebody, how much does this cost? That is just an invitation to pay them, or it's an invitation to haggle and negotiate. Like, that's like game on. Now we get to negotiate. Like, as an American, when someone tells you the price, then you give them the money. But I've been in places before when I get ready to they go, well, no, that's not what the price is. And I'm like, well, you just said that's the price. And they're like, well, no, that's the starting price. And then we have to talk and we have to, and I'm like, well, I don't just what's the price? Well, that's not fun. Like, we have to haggle. Like, I want to invoke a little bit of that for us. The reality is, once the client gives you the notice to proceed, then they can ask for anything they want, right? Just like Eileen was saying, what Liz was saying. So just what we're also like, think about this as a game. They give you the notice to proceed. They assume the job is going to get done. And now they can ask for anything they want. By the way, the clients, as soon as they give you the notice to proceed, you know what they do with the scope of work? They do one of 2 things. They either throw it in the trash or they galvanize it to beat you with it. This should be in there. This should be in there. So it's a game. Right? They're going to ask for whatever they want. It's our responsibility. It's our obligation to ask for the change. And Eileen, you're like, I don't want to. We're going to talk through how to do that, right? Because I agree with you. I don't want to nickel and dime with them because that's going to drive everybody nuts. But I also don't want to get kind of pushed so far aside that eventually one day I just kind of explode and I get frustrated, right? There's a dance. It's a little bit somewhere in between there. So it's our responsibility to ask for the change because we have to assume that they're going to ask for anything they want whenever they want it. Number 2, we've got to ask in the moment. Asking too late, it's not going to work. What do you think the likelihood would be right now if you talk to one of your clients and said, hey, we were doing some extra work for you in January. I mean, we thought, the job had just started. We had all that money. We had all this time. Well, we went a little above and beyond. Can we get another $10,000 in a few weeks? Because, I mean, back in January, we did this extra. Forget about it, right? That's never going to go anywhere. And then the last item would be poor documentation. We have to understand the client's documentation process. Is it as simple as an email? Or do we have to go through procurement and get approvals that are going to take 3 weeks? And then Eileen's argument, all of a sudden, is pretty good because I don't want 3 weeks to go by just to wait to get that approval for $2,000 worth of work. I mean, come on, can't you do the work for me? So it's a little bit of all of those elements in there. So what we have is a 6-step process for planning for and then managing change. Right. I didn't ask the question earlier, but has anyone ever had a project with 0 changes on it? Not 0 change orders, but 0 changes. I mean, the reality in this business is every job has changes, right? It's what we do with them and how we negotiate ourselves along the way. So let's talk about these 6 steps. Number 1, ensure that the client understands that change happens. Another way of kind of looking at the step number 1 is this. I say, have make-believe conversations. So just like you asked earlier, who was it? Liz asked, or no, it was Axel asked, when do we have the opportunity plan discussion? To me, there's 2 times to begin talking about change. One is before the job even starts, and the second is as the job progresses. And that's why I call it a make-believe conversation, because before the job even starts, I like to talk to the client about change. Just as we would talk about scope, just as we would talk about schedule, just as we would talk about budget, I want to talk about change in there. Because this is when we get to understand the client's sensitivity to change, their perspective on change. Some clients would say, yeah, of course, I don't know exactly what I would want for this, that, and the other. And we'd say, okay, do you realize that if I don't have that certainty now, I can scope out to the limit of the certainty, but when we get to that phase of the project, we might have to change some things around. Some clients would say, of course, I understand that. Like, we'll get to that when we get to that. Great. See what we've planted the seed then for we need to have a conversation later on. I've talked to some other clients and I said that same conversation, they go, no change orders. I'm like, wow, you're yelling at me, right? I'm like, we're just, this is not even a change order. We're just having a make-believe conversation. And they go, well, I don't want any change orders. I can't. And I go, oh, see, that's a data point. As a scientist, I'm going, I'm going to have to limit this. I like to have make-believe conversations because they're not real. You know, you get to see if they're sophisticated, if they have experience that they can bring to you. In your experience, what have you done? What happens if a code changes? What happens if we get delayed, right? What happens if there's, unforeseen challenges? We get to understand their ability to be a problem solver with you, or their ability to just perpetrate, that's in the scope, you have to do it. I like to learn that. During the job, if change comes up, then we know what kind of posture to bring to that conversation. For some folks, it might be as simple as, hey, remember that make-believe conversation we had 2 months ago? We got to have it again now, right? And your body physiologically even believes, oh, we're just having that conversation again. It feels a little better. Or in other instances, when you've been warned about having that change conversation, you go, hey, we need to have a hard conversation about change. You've said there's sensitivities earlier on. We're going to need to have that tough conversation, right? But it prepares me to go in and have that conversation. All the different conversations that we had were, let me say, I've heard those discussions before, but why would we do extra work that was out of scope that we might not get paid for, right? It's a little bit of a rhetorical question, but why would you do extra work that's out of scope that we're not going to get paid for? Has anybody here on the Zoom done extra work that was out of scope that you didn't think you'd get paid for? Why? Yep, Scott has too. So either in the chat box, or if you want to unmute yourself, why have you done that extra work? I mean, we talked about the drivers of that a little bit ago, but let me hear a little bit of why you would do it.
So one of the reasons we would do it is existing relationship with the client. I mean, knowing that the change is not of substantial nature, we didn't want to look like it was nickel and diming them. Okay,
that nickel and diamond that Eileen brought up. Scott, let me ask a question. Who was talking? Was that Scott or was that somebody else?
Yes, that was Scott.
Okay. Do you work with shoplifters, or are these good people, or are they just constantly stealing from you?
Well, no, but I don't know.
Okay. See that that pause is what I wanted you to have. When we talk about managing the client, some of my clients I'll do anything in the world for. You know, there's a saying for some of my clients, when my client says jump, I say how high on the way up. I don't know if you've ever heard that expression before. They say jump, I say how high on the way up. I have some other clients that say jump, and I go, pardon me? Yeah, we need to talk about that. See the different posture there? It depends. For some of my quality and strategic clients, you know, I will be in a very different posture. Some of my non-quality or base level clients, I might not do that. We'll talk about that when we talk about managing the clients. But underneath what you said, Scott, and I'm reading some of the comments in there. Get the project across the finish line. Yep. Get paid. Yep. Would you say you're trying to do these extra things just to invest in the relationship and to try to get some credit for it in one way or another? And all I want us to do on this thing is, by the way, I'm not talking about, you know, the big things. I think, let me just ask a question. Can we all agree that we generally as consultants know if something is in scope or out of scope, right? If it's changed. We're not talking about black and white right here. We're talking about the gray area in between that's nickeling and diming on either side. We're talking about, Liz, I just said it's impossible to develop a perfect work breakdown structure. And then the client says, aren't you smart enough to know that? I mean, part of the answer may be no. I mean, we're using our best professional judgment and figuring this out, and something unexpected came along, right? So these are harder conversations to have. They're nuanced conversations. We're talking about the gray area in between. And it all goes back to trying to invest in that relationship. But what I want to do, let me see, Justin just wrote a big comment. It is an opportunity to impress them. And we'll talk a little bit about how we do that, Justin. Because even then I want to get credit for doing this little extra stuff that's going to impress them. So for me, step 2 is just establish a system for tracking these little things that we do. Because if we do these little things, number one, your client might not even know about it, right? So the first things first is just letting them know it's something a little bit extra, or we perceive it as a little extra. And number 2, jot it down. I think it would be naive for me to sit in this program and say, never do work that's out of scope that you might not get paid for, or always ask for a change management, you know, signed document before you do anything. In my experience, if I told you to do that, folks would go, yeah, Bill, you don't live in the real world. So do that for the black and white things that you know is out of scope. But for these little things, these nickeling and diming, I want to write it down. So what if you had in your scope of work a certain number of meetings? Or what if you had that we're going to do 1 meeting with the client per week out at their site? Let's say those site visits are Tuesdays. Okay, and this could still be going on. At least where I am in Seattle, we still have construction going. People are still doing site visits. Folks are doing, you know, CA services. They're looking at things. So maybe you went there Tuesday morning, you visited the site, and you get an email from the client on Wednesday morning that says, hey, can you come down to the site again tomorrow? Right? Scope of work says 1 site visit per week. What are you going to do? I embrace change with great enthusiasm, right? You're going to get a change order? Who's going to get a change order? Eileen, let me put you on the hot seat for a second. Are you going to get a change order? You're going to do it? I mean, scope of work says 1 site visit per week. We went there on Tuesday, and then you get a note or an email or a phone call Wednesday. They want you to come again. You know, hey, I want you to come down to the site tomorrow. What are you going to do?
If we have the number of visits in the contract or the number of weeks of CA, then I've got a leg to stand on. But if it wasn't specified in the contract that the principal negotiated, then I'm kind of hosed. I have to go.
It's a little bit hard, right? I mean, one way or the other, even if you're, well, let's say your contract is pretty specific about it. It says 1 site visit per week, and we were there on Tuesday, but then you get a call on Wednesday that they say, hey, we want you to come down.
Right. Well, can I trade that for next week's visit? If I come tomorrow, do I need to come next Tuesday or whatever day?
See,
or can we FaceTime?
Right? Can we
That's
FaceTime?
been awesome. Yeah.
It has been awesome. I have 3 doors down from me is a buddy. He's an architect, and they've been using FaceTime for inspections and some of those
It's
elements.
amazing. Actually,
It is.
well, different conversation, but yeah, you can do a
But
lot
but
through
it's
that
important.
doesn't require a site visit. It also
Well-
depends how far it is. If it's like, oh, I have to drive past there on my way to the office anyway, it's not really a big deal.
Mm-hmm. This is the calculus that I think that Liz brought up earlier, that Justin has in his comment, that you're talking about. I love the discussion you're having right now, because the meta of this discussion is a little bit of pushback. You put some friction back into it. That's what I want to do as a project manager. I want to step back a little bit, and I want to say, how much friction is there in this scenario? Can you stop by the site again tomorrow? Well, let's see. It's on your way into the office, or you're going to drive by there anyways, and it's going to take 5 minutes. You'd probably do it, right? But I want to say, hey, you know what? The site, or rather the scope has 1 site visit per week. I was there yesterday. Can we do it by FaceTime? Or, could I just stop by and see it next Tuesday? You just reciprocate it in kind with a little bit of friction. And that's all I want to do. Let's say you had an important meeting tomorrow morning that's going to be a 2-hour meeting. And you're going to have to cancel the meeting to go in and do that. I'm going to put a little more friction in there. I don't know if anybody's ever done that, but I think, a little bit afraid to tell my client no as a project manager for a long time. I'd be the first, hey, can you come out to the site? Sure, I'll be there. And I hang up the phone and I go, damn, why did I say that? Now I've got to reschedule that meeting. Now I'm going to be working late tomorrow night. Now tomorrow night is date night, and I just blew that off. I don't want to go to your stupid site. But did I say any of that to the client? Not a word of it,
Hopefully
right?
not.
No, I didn't. But even my team, what does my team then see? All of a sudden Bill's shifting these meetings about Bill's not, what is he going to do? It just put me into a tailspin, right? One day I actually told that client, he said, can you come down to the site tomorrow? And I told him no. You know why? But first of all, I thought I lost my marbles, but I was like, I couldn't believe it. And he goes, why not? I go, well, I got a meeting in the morning, and last time I did that, I did that, and then I ended up skipping date night. And I was like, I'm totally losing my marbles. I don't know where I'm going with this client. And he was like, well, Bill, you can't do that. And I was like, what? He goes, Bill, I lost my first marriage making work more of a priority than my marriage. And I'm like, this is the twilight zone right now. And he goes, where are you going for date night? And I go, I haven't even picked, because, truth be told, you've ruined like the last 4 date nights. Right? I'm like, this is like, I'm off the rails with this conversation. And you know what he said? He was like, there's a great Italian place. It's right down the street from the office. I want you to go have dinner with your wife, and you have to come in my office tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, and you tell me how the date night went. I was like, this is ridiculous. And he goes, no, I'm serious. And you know what? That relationship with that client took on a whole new tenor. You know why? Because I told him no, right? And I thought I lost it. And he opened up to me personally. I opened up to him personally. Did I ever do some things for him? Absolutely. There was a public meeting that we had 2 hours away. The afternoon before that public meeting, we found a fundamental typo in the handouts, 200 handouts, and there was a misspelling in it. And we had to redo all of the handouts, right? I mean, it was almost an all-nighter. We went through a few things. Like, we're talking 60-page meeting packets, that this was a pervasive typo, right? That was all through it. So we had to make, 200 copies of new 60-page things. It had 5 rounds of review, and we had to do the whole thing. My wife ended up driving me at 4 a.m, 2 hours to the public meeting. And why did we do all that? A nod, because when this executive got up, he said, you know what, I just want to commend the team for all the hard work they've done so far. There we have Bill, one of our consultants. Actually, his wife is here too. We thank you. We thank your wife for getting all this stuff done and kind of moving on. I moved heaven and earth so that that client would say thank you, right? So a lot of us would do a lot of work to get paid. Some of us would do a lot of work occasionally just for thank you, right? But I like what Eileen did. You put a little friction into the system, and then what I want you to do here is just write it down. Because if you go to that site, or if you do these little things that are going to nickel and dime us, and we don't write it down, you're going to forget about it, and it's going to go into the ether. And just like Justin said, you're doing this to try to impress them. or try to build a relationship, if we don't write it down, we're going to forget all about it. That to me is the essence. I actually have this project change log in all my folders on my projects. I label it ! space dash space project change log. It's simple. So I and my entire team, if they do anything to make a good impression, we can kind of track it. That's the big deal. I'm going to come back to this later on when we're talking about managing the client, and I'm going to show you where this really turns into gold. So the first thing, we just have to write it down. The next few things are a lot more simple. Agree on freeze milestones. We talked about trying to have deliverable-based activities. That's what I like. So think about some transmittal letter or email statements. You can read the text there, but say something like, once this is done, or to your point earlier, Liz, I like to even say the following submittals upon review and comment by owner, or I like to say after a week, or after a two, put in that time definitive thing so that they don't go, hey, remember that thing you gave me a month ago? And I'll say, yes, it's now carved in granite, because we said after a week, it's carved in granite. It's no longer a draft, right? But this is something that I like to share with them that just helps the client know that I'm trying to push their project along. Number 4, agree on how to handle changes requiring extra fee. So Justin talked a little bit about, we might have some more budget in there. I want to look at things even before I get to that point, Justin. If a change is initiated by the client, right, I feel like we are justified in being able to ask for that extra money. Does that make sense? On the other hand, if we want to initiate the change, we've got to convince the client on that side. So that makes sense. The reality, though, is these first 2 elements, I think there can be a little bit of tension when we really try to look at it from a binary perspective. What I think is a lot of, and in my experience, a lot of change is driven by an outside third party or an uncertainty or something like that. So this is maybe a change in existing conditions for the civil side of the world. For Eileen, you in interiors, maybe we're going to do a renovation and someone says, yeah, you can come in and do a walkthrough, but no destructive, invasive kind of, surveying of that. But you pull down some drywall and you realize there's asbestos behind it, or you realize there's a conduit that's running electrical through there, or there's something like, well, you asked us for a non-invasive survey, we did a walkthrough, and now look at what we're dealing with. What about change conditions due to weather, due to, you name it? All of a sudden, what I want to do is I want to get to be shoulder to shoulder with my client. So rather than I want more money, or rather than you want something else, I try to get on the other side and I reframe this issue and I say, what are we going to do about X? Like, what are we going to do? Even just that simple language tends to defuse that situation and puts us on the same kind of side of the table to work to this. I've actually walked into discussions where the client goes, what are you going to do about this? We open this and there's no problem. And I say, well, you know what? We didn't have this available information at the time we were putting together some decisions, so we need to sit down and talk about it. Just defuse the room a bit by taking that wind out of that sails of I want a conflict or confrontation. What about a project on hold? Some of us may be dealing with that through this uncertainty of the last little bit. There's a few things that we've got to do. Number 1, I got to get some agreement with that client as soon as possible. What does this mean contractually? So I'll go back to the contract and look at that and say, are there provisions in there? Are there not? But I need to work through, how long do we think we're going to be on hold? Are there certain evaluative milestones or metrics? As I'm looking state to state to state, our reopening plans right now have gated kind of milestones. These are some of the conversations. Sometimes there's time certain. Sometimes there's milestone certain elements that must be met. Should anyone on our team keep working? It's amazing, even in some times of stop work, we're still asked to do things. We may need a remedy, or we'll talk about change a little bit later today and then tomorrow as well, to kind of get hold for that. Because we may still be doing progress meetings or others. We may be burning through some of our meetings, but not be productive making deliverables. We'll have to come back and talk through that. And what about the cost of restarting? Just like in the construction world, there's a cost associated with mobilization and demobilization. We might have that on our side as well. So these are critical components to talk through. As we're doing that, this is a good point to remember. Number 5, document the client's approval process. It's as important to understand my client's authority matrix as it is we were talking about ours yesterday. Does our client have the authority to actually direct us to do something contractually or not? That's a key question. Some of our clients might not have the authority to really tell us to do some work or not do work. We might have to get to know their contracting folks just as well as just their technical folks. That's a big deal. What if we're waiting for approval? You know, we've made the decision we need to ask for a change order, but it takes them 2 or 3 weeks. To me, it's kind of like a Spider-Man movie. I like to say there's great power, excuse me, there's sometimes great power in having no authority to do something, right? There's sometimes great power in having no authority to do something. What I mean by that is I've been able to tell my clients at different times, hey, you know what? I can't do this work unless I get an email. Or, you know what? I can't do this work. You know, we have limits within our organization. If your boss talks to my boss can tell me to go do that work, but I really can't do it without the change order. So it's sometimes your responsibility, I think, as a project manager to say, I can't do this, but, you know, I can take a directive from my boss, but not from my client. So that's one conversation point. And also ask for the client to set up a project reserve fund. That's something that they should do on their side, but it's also on our side as well. Contingency. If we have a bit of contingency in our budget, if they have contingency in their budget, that's the ability to tap into that contingency and maybe not have to get a change order, right? That contingency is something that we're not necessarily guaranteed that will be paid that money, but as these little changes come up, rather than having a big change order, they may be able to say, yes, take a few dollars out of contingency that we can grab. We can do that, then we don't need a contract amendment or change order. So that's an element.